Lindsay Lohan was once the face of a generation. With her auburn hair, freckled charm, and uncanny ability to light up the screen, she wasn't just a child star, she was the child star. When The Parent Trap hit theaters in 1998, audiences watched in awe as a young girl carried an entire film, playing twin sisters. It wasn't just talent, it was magic, and Hollywood knew it. By the early 2002, she had become a cultural phenomenon. Freaky Friday, Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, and Mean Girls made her a household name. Magazine covers hailed her as the new "it girl." Brands wanted her face. Studios chased her name. At just 17, she was commanding millions not just in salary, but in influence. But behind every glowing headline was a photograph taken in the dark. Paparazzi lenses caught glimpses of Lindsay leaving clubs in the early hours, her smile fading into confusion. Tabloids speculated, then accused. Late-night hosts joked, and the world once cheering her rise began to salivate over her fall. What no one asked was, why? Why did this young woman, adored by millions, begin to unravel so publicly? What was hidden beneath the flawless makeup, the rehearsed interviews, and the designer gowns? Because the truth is, Lindsay Lohan's story is not one of simple fame and failure. It is a reflection of an industry that devours its brightest stars, of a family that blurred the line between love and exploitation, and of a girl forced to grow up too fast, too soon, with no one there to catch her when the cameras turned off. This is not the tabloid version. This is the untold legacy of Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay D. Lohan was born on the 2nd of July, 1986, in the Bronx, New York, and raised in the affluent suburb of Merrick on Long Island. At first glance, her upbringing seemed comfortable, even privileged. But beneath the surface, the Lohan household was riddled with volatility, contradictions, and emotional instability. Her father, Michael Lohan, was a Wall Street trader with a volatile temper and a long list of legal troubles. He would come in and out of Lindsay's life like a storm, sometimes loving, often destructive. Her mother, Dina, a former dancer and aspiring actress, had dreams of stardom she never realized. When Lindsay began showing talent as a toddler, Dina saw her daughter not just as a child to raise, but as a second chance, a vessel to fulfill her own Hollywood ambitions. By the time Lindsay was 3, she was modeling. By 6, she had appeared in over 60 commercials. Her freckled face and sparkling eyes were everywhere: Jell-O, Pizza Hut, Wendy's, Plast. There was something undeniably captivating about her presence, even then. But what seemed like the beginning of a fairy tale was, in truth, the beginning of a life lived under performance, a child constantly told to smile, to charm, to be perfect for the camera. There was little room for childhood. School became an afterthought. Playdates were replaced with auditions. Rejection and praise came not from classmates or teachers, but from casting directors and agents. Lindsay learned early that love was conditional, that applause was the currency of worth. The pressure to succeed wasn't just external, it was embedded in her family dynamic. Dina became her manager, present at every meeting, every shoot, every set. And Michael's absence, punctuated by arrests, infidelity, and public meltdowns, only amplified the chaos. The family was often in the news not for Lindsay's rising career, but for the dysfunction surrounding her. Still, Lindsay coped the only way she knew how: by performing. She was intuitive, adaptive, and brilliant at giving people what they wanted. Whether it was casting directors or her own parents, she learned to be the version of Lindsay that others needed: bright, funny, reliable, exceptional. But this constant act came at a cost. There was no space for vulnerability, no refuge from pressure, and no adult in her life truly looking out for her well-being without strings attached. Her success became the center of the Lohan household financially, emotionally, and socially. She wasn't just the child. She was the provider, the brand, the centerpiece of a carefully curated illusion of success. When she landed The Parent Trap at age 11, it wasn't just a break, it was a turning point. Hollywood welcomed her with open arms. Critics praised her comedic timing and emotional depth. Disney saw her as the next generation's golden girl. But with the fame came more responsibility, more demands, and a growing sense that her childhood, if it had ever existed, was over. Even at that age, Lindsay was juggling scripts, interviews, photo shoots, and schoolwork. She was praised for her professionalism, but no one questioned why a child had to be so professional in the first place. No one wondered what it meant for a preteen to carry an entire film, emotionally, financially, logistically. Looking back, there were signs even then, moments of anxiety, the pressure to always be on, the quiet sadness behind her eyes in candid interviews. But the industry didn't see a child, they saw a product. And her family, whether knowingly or not, became enablers of that machine. Lindsay Lohan's early years were not defined by innocence, but by expectation. By the time she entered her teenage years, she wasn't learning how to navigate life. She was already deep into a career that demanded perfection, maturity, and resilience no child should have to possess. And though the world saw a star on the rise, Lindsay was already carrying more than most adults ever would. When The Parent Trap premiered in 1998, Lindsay Lohan was just 11 years old, yet she carried the film like a seasoned professional. Audiences fell in love with her dual performance as Annie and Hallie, and Hollywood took notice. Her charm was effortless, her timing precise, her emotional range stunning. It wasn't just potential, it was fully realized star power. Disney quickly took her under its wing, and the early 2000s became Lindsay's personal era. With each project, her fame grew. Life Size, Freaky Friday, Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, all family-friendly successes that showcased her versatility and magnetism. But it was Mean Girls in 2004 that truly cemented her cultural impact. The film wasn't just a hit, it became a generational touchstone. Lindsay's performance as Katie Heron was sharp, funny, and emotionally layered, proving she could carry not just a movie, but a movement. At 17, she was no longer just a teen star. She was the teen star. Tabloids followed her every move. Fans idolized her. Executives trusted her to headline major productions. Fashion brands saw her as a muse. She released a platinum-selling pop album, Speak, and became a fixture on red carpets, talk shows, and teen magazine covers. But while the world celebrated her glow-up, something quieter was unraveling underneath. Lindsay was making adult money and handling adult responsibility, but she was still a teenager, vulnerable, overworked, and increasingly isolated. Her life was a carousel of obligations. Film shoots, press tours, recording sessions, endorsement deals. Her childhood had been sacrificed for a schedule. Her privacy traded for fame. There was no pause, no breath, no space to figure out who she was beneath the roles and the makeup. The cracks began to show subtly at first. Rumors surfaced of Lindsay showing up late to sets. There were whispers of exhaustion, of diva behavior, of conflicts with co-stars. The press, which had once adored her, began to turn. Suddenly, her every misstep was magnified. Her every night out documented with a flashbulb and a caption. By 2005, headlines started to shift. No longer focused on her performances, they obsessed over her weight, her dating life, her club appearances. Photos of her looking gaunt sparked speculation about eating disorders. Anonymous sources cited bad influences and unprofessional behavior. She became tabloid fodder, not for failure, but simply for being young, famous, and female in a world eager to devour both. What no one seemed to grasp was that Lindsay wasn't spinning out of control, she was slipping through the cracks. She had been working non-stop since she could walk. She had no stable foundation, no true mentors, no system to protect her from the very machine profiting off her image. Her family, fractured and unstable, provided little refuge. Her father's repeated legal troubles and media appearances only fueled the frenzy. Her mother, acting as her manager, often blurred the line between guidance and exploitation. Lindsay was caught in a web where everyone benefited from her success, but few paused to consider the cost to her soul. She was too famous to be a normal teenager, too young to be treated like an adult, too isolated to reach out for help. And as the offers kept coming, so did the pressure. More scripts, more tours, more photo ops. But inside, Lindsay was fading not because she lacked talent or drive, but because she had been asked to carry too much for too long, with no room to fall apart. Even in interviews, her smile seemed forced, her answers rehearsed. There was a disconnect between the image the world saw and the person who was struggling just beneath the surface. The applause never stopped. But Lindsay had already begun to disappear behind it. By 2006, Lindsay Lohan was at the height of her career and at the brink of personal ruin. Her fame had grown larger than any film role, and her life had become public property. The cameras no longer followed her because she was starring in the next big hit. They followed her because she might slip, and when she did, they were ready to catch it. The headlines were relentless. Every misstep was front-page news. Every party she attended, every romantic relationship, every visibly tired or erratic moment became a media event. She wasn't seen as a person anymore. She was a spectacle, a symbol of excess, youth, and dysfunction. But beneath the sensationalism was a human being in deep distress. Lindsay began struggling with substance abuse in her late teens. The nonstop work, pressure to remain thin, lack of emotional support, and ever-intensifying public gaze became impossible to endure. Alcohol, prescription pills, and eventually cocaine became both a crutch and a curse. She wasn't partying to feel good, she was escaping the reality that fame had never truly fulfilled her. It had consumed her. Her first DUI arrest came in May 2007. A second, less than 2 months later, included a charge for possession of cocaine. The image of Lindsay in a mugshot, makeup smeared, eyes hollow, became iconic, not because it revealed something new, but because it confirmed what the world had already decided. She had become a train wreck. But that word, thrown around with cruel glee, ignored the complexity of what was happening. Lindsay wasn't imploding for attention. She was coping poorly, but desperately with a life that had offered her no stability, no guidance, no kindness. She entered rehab multiple times between 2007 and 2010. The stints were short, often court-ordered, and rarely effective, not because Lindsay didn't want to heal, but because the system surrounding her didn't allow for true recovery. Paparazzi waited outside the gates of treatment centers. Tabloids paid insiders for stories about her progress. Late-night talk shows mocked her every move. The machinery of shame was in full motion, and Lindsay was its prime subject. During this period, her career crumbled. Directors refused to insure her. Studios backed out of contracts. Films she was once in talks for went to other actresses. Her name, once synonymous with promise, became shorthand for chaos. And yet, Hollywood didn't completely abandon her, not because they cared, but because they saw profit in her pain. She was still marketable, just in a different way now. Interviews became damage control. She would appear on camera, explaining her side, insisting she was clean, trying to reclaim some dignity. But every sentence was dissected, every expression analyzed. Sincerity was treated as manipulation. Vulnerability was mocked. The trauma wasn't just emotional, it was systemic. Lindsay had grown up in an industry that capitalized on her youth, beauty, and relatability, and then punished her for trying to survive it. Her family life only deepened the wound. Michael Lohan continued to sell stories to the press. Dina still walked red carpets beside her, acting more like a peer than a parent. Lindsay was surrounded by people who benefited from her brand, not who nurtured her humanity. There were moments during these years that hinted at how much she was hurting. Tearful court appearances, exhausted paparazzi footage of her collapsing into a car, journal entries leaked to the press. She was pleading, in ways big and small, to be seen not as a punchline but as a person. But the world wasn't listening. In many ways, Lindsay became the prototype for the tabloid meltdown. Before Britney shaved her head, before Amanda Bynes disappeared, there was Lindsay. And what the world learned was that the fall of a star, especially a young woman, wasn't something to mourn, it was something to consume. Her trauma wasn't hidden. It was sold, packaged, shared, retweeted. She wasn't just living through pain, she was performing it for an audience that didn't know how to look away. And that more than any headline, any rehab stay, any courtroom photo, was the tragedy. Not that she fell, but that so many people watched, and so few asked why. By the early 2010s, Lindsay Lohan had become a ghost of her former self, not because she had disappeared from view, but because the person the public once celebrated no longer seemed to exist. The bubbly teen idol, the quick-witted actress, the girl next door with Hollywood magic in her smile. She had been replaced by a figure defined by court hearings, rehab check-ins, and whispers of wasted potential. After her legal battles and failed comeback attempts, Lindsay found herself drifting further and further from the industry that had once revolved around her. The projects that did come her way were either small-budget experiments or media stunts, none of them capable of restoring her credibility, none of them offering real redemption. In 2012, she played Elizabeth Taylor in Liz and Dick, a Lifetime movie hyped as her triumphant return. But the film was widely panned, and so was her performance. Critics didn't just critique the work, they dissected her appearance, her voice, her body language. They didn't see an actress trying to rebuild. They saw a spectacle trying to stay relevant. By then, something had shifted in Lindsay. She was still trying, still showing up, still doing interviews, still insisting that she was ready for a fresh start. But the spark that once made her magnetic seemed dimmed, not by age or failure, but by exhaustion. She wasn't even 30, and yet she carried the weariness of someone twice her age. The weight of public humiliation had carved itself into her bones. Between 2013 and 2015, Lindsay entered a strange phase of semi-exile. She moved to London, briefly starred in a stage production of Speed the Plow, and tried to live a quieter life. Away from the paparazzi-saturated streets of Los Angeles, she found something resembling normalcy. For the first time in years, she could walk into a restaurant without being followed. She could breathe. That search for peace eventually took her even further to Dubai, a place with strict privacy laws, where fame was less of a currency and more of a curiosity. In Dubai, Lindsay found the one thing she hadn't had since childhood: space. There, she began to rebuild not her career, but herself. She opened beach clubs in Greece. She began exploring entrepreneurial ventures. She stepped away from the grind of film sets and the sting of media scrutiny. Her social media posts became more grounded, no longer filled with red carpet glamour or cryptic rants. They began reflecting a quieter, more introspective version of herself. She didn't declare this a comeback. She didn't issue press releases about healing or transformation. Instead, she simply lived. Slowly, quietly, Lindsay Lohan became a woman no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she was learning to protect. She stopped chasing Hollywood's approval, perhaps for the first time in her life. And in that silence, she found love. In 2021, she announced her engagement to Bader Shammas, a financier living in Dubai. The news came not through tabloid leaks, but through a calm, understated Instagram post. No paparazzi, no frenzy. Just a photo of a smiling couple and a caption filled with joy. In 2022, they married. In 2023, they welcomed their first child, a son named Luai. And again, the world learned of it not through chaos, but through Lindsay's own words. It was poetic in a way. After years of being chased, framed, distorted, she was finally writing her story herself. None of this erased the past. The trauma, the scars, the years lost to addiction and judgment, they remained. But Lindsay had reached a point where those wounds were no longer her identity. They were chapters, not conclusions. She hadn't vanished. She had simply chosen to leave behind the noise that never let her grow. Lindsay Lohan never won an Oscar. She never topped the Billboard Hot 100. She never led a billion-dollar franchise or became a critically acclaimed auteur. By Hollywood's traditional standards, her legacy might seem incomplete, a career cut short, a talent wasted, a cautionary tale. But that would be missing the point. Because what Lindsay Lohan leaves behind is not a perfect resume. It's a mirror, a reflection of a system that creates stars out of children and then punishes them for growing up. A case study in what happens when fame is given without protection, when money is made without mentorship, when a person becomes a product before they even know who they are. Lindsay's legacy is deeply uncomfortable, not because of who she became, but because of how we watched her fall. We didn't just observe her self-destruction. We participated in it. The jokes, the headlines, the camera lenses shoved in her face at 4 a.m, they weren't accidents. They were entertainment, monetized pain. And yet, through it all, Lindsay survived. She didn't vanish into obscurity. She didn't succumb completely. She made mistakes, owned them, and slowly began the process of healing, not for applause, not for a movie deal, but for herself. In recent years, she's re-emerged not as a tabloid fixture, but as a woman in control of her own narrative. Her 2022 Netflix film, Falling for Christmas, was lighthearted and modest, a holiday rom-com that didn't try to reinvent her, but rather reintroduce her on her own terms. It wasn't a comeback designed to silence critics. It was a quiet return to something she loved: acting. More than that, it signaled that Lindsay was no longer chasing relevance. She had finally stepped off the treadmill of public approval. And in doing so, she found something far more rare than fame. She found peace. Her legacy is not just her early films or her troubled 22nd. It's her resilience. It's the fact that, in a world that tried to write her off again and again, she chose not to disappear, but to grow. There is something powerful about a person who has been publicly broken and then decides, against all odds, to stitch herself back together. And Lindsay did it in full view of a world that never gave her the space to fail privately. She became, in many ways, a forerunner for a conversation that Hollywood is only now beginning to have about mental health, child stardom, and the toll of public life. She walked so others could run, and sometimes stumble with more understanding, more compassion. We look at stars like Britney Spears, Amanda Bynes, Demi Lovato, and others now through a more nuanced lens. We talk about trauma, about addiction, about institutional failure. But before the world was ready to have those conversations, Lindsay was already living their consequences. That, too, is part of her legacy. She reminds us that fame doesn't heal, it hides. That youth, when exploited, curdles into anxiety and addiction. That even the brightest stars need someone to tell them they can stop shining for a moment and simply be. Lindsay Lohan may never reclaim the superstardom she once held, but maybe that's not what matters anymore. Because what she's created in its place is something more authentic, more grounded, and more human. She's not a cautionary tale, she's a survivor. And perhaps that's the most meaningful legacy of all. We loved her when she made us laugh in Mean Girls. We judged her when she stumbled out of nightclubs. We forgot her when she needed space to heal. But Lindsay Lohan has never stopped being here, not for the fame, not for the cameras, but for herself. In a world where we are quick to crown idols and even quicker to discard them, her journey forces us to pause, to ask, what do we really owe the people we place on pedestals? What does it cost to grow up in a world that monetizes your every move? And when we look back at the headlines, the photos, the jokes, do we see a girl who lost her way, or a girl who was never shown the way to begin with? Lindsay's story isn't just about loss or recovery. It's about evolution, about what happens when a young woman refuses to let the world define her forever by her darkest chapters. If this story moved you, share it. And if there's another name you want to hear, another hidden story behind the fame, tell us. Because behind every spotlight, there is a shadow. And behind every legend, there is a human being just trying to be seen.